Those of you just joining, or if this is your first time, this is a GDR submission training. We're going to go over the proper ways to formulate a GDR data submission and a little history on at least why we're doing this and how we're going about it. We'll cover what DOE is looking for in a quality data submission and what they're not looking for, what they don't want. And we'll cover some submission best practices. I'll start with a little presentation and then I'll dive into actually completing a submission live in the tool so you can see it work and see how things go. And at any point, I encourage you to just chime in and ask questions. And I definitely left some room at the end also for additional questions if anyone wants to revisit any particular topic or has specific questions about their project or their project's data. So, those of you that don't know me, my name is John Weirs. I am the lead developer on the Geothermal Data Repository, and I'm with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Thanks for joining, and I will go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to talk about is why we do this. I really like this quote from DOE's strategic plan in 2011. DOE success should be measured not when a project's completed or experiments concluded, but when scientific or technical information is disseminated. That's to say that any knowledge gained from the research and the work that we're doing, if that knowledge is just on a hard drive locked in a desk drawer, it's basically valueless. And at most, it's at risk of being lost forever when a particular key individual, changes jobs or, buys a new desk. And so we really want to prevent that. We want to prevent the duplication of effort. We want to get the word out there to the general scientific community about the great work that we're doing so that we can advance that work and build upon it and innovate faster. And so there's the cliche saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. That's a general premise behind what we're doing, but it's more than that. The executive order that came out in 2013 was talking about access to information can fuel innovation and improve scientific discovery and even lead to job creation. And the GDR has been around now for a long time. It's already home to over 790 submissions, 3,600 resources, or 600 gigabytes of public accessible data. Founded in 2012 online in its current form since January of 2013, basically. We've seen all these success stories. We've had instances of researchers sharing their data and putting it out there online, and then other organizations who are interested in the same topics coming along and saying, oh, wow, like you've already done that. We were thinking about doing that and we didn't realize somebody had already started on it. So you know what? We're just going to hire you to finish this research and continue it, or we're just going to give you funding to continue your project. And so we've seen good examples of the community coming together to basically to stand on each other's shoulders and reach new heights faster. And we've also seen fun examples of innovation coming from data sharing. I'll talk about this a little bit in my slide on raw data, but it really does lend itself to innovation. We've had some cool stories there as well. The GDR is developed on OpenAI. One of the big questions everyone asks is, what's the difference between the GDR and the NGDS? Well, the NGDS is the National Geothermal Data System. It's a system of distributed nodes, distributed data repositories that work together as a system to share information with each other. And the GDR is DOE's data repository on that system. So the GDR is the place that houses all of the data from DOE Geothermal Technology Office funded research and development efforts. So that's the distinction there. It is built on OpenAI. There are a couple advantages to OpenAI. It's cloud-based. It allows us to hold a lot of information very cheaply. It's secure, but it's not tied to any single lab, so we don't have to have NREL logins for everyone or anything like that. And it's been around since 2009, and there are a lot of different tools that have been built on it. So there are a lot of cost savings we've been able to leverage. For example, users for the GDR just need an OpenAI account. They may already have one because they may be users of these other tools. And recently we also integrated with Google. So even if you just have a Google account, you can sign in with that and you're good. So that's the background. I'm going to hop into an overview of submission, but before I do, any questions on background information? Nope, didn't think so. What kinds of information does DOE actually want on the GDR? And we basically want everything. Like I said before, everything funded by GTO. Any research, fruits of labor, any efforts that come out of that, we want to put up there to make available to other people in the geothermal industry so that we can get it out there. So all data generated, including raw data. And this is what I was talking about earlier. There's an intrinsic value to raw data. Raw data is free to be used again and again in unforeseen ways. It can aid in the understanding of aggregate findings and summaries for sure, but it's also reuseful. You know, summarized information is by its very nature pushed towards a particular goal, whereas raw data is free to be used in any number of ways. And a really fun example of that actually came out of the GDR is we had some micropaleontologists looking at geothermal core samples and some of the other core photo data, high resolution core photos in the GDR to look for traces of microorganism fossils in different layers of rock, and that gave birth to a whole new industry of determining lithology, and even in the oil and gas industry, people are looking at the potential for certain reservoirs based on micropaleontology, which is just fascinating to me. So there's what started as a completely innovative, unrelated technique where, you know, geothermal data is actually being found useful by a whole different field of biologists, has come full circle now, and the results of their innovations are actually helping out in some new geothermal and oil and gas developments. So that's pretty exciting. There's a bunch of other stories like that too, but hopefully you get the idea. The more raw the data is, the more free it is to be used in any number of unforeseen ways, even ways wholly unrelated to the project from which the data originated. But there is such a thing as too raw. I mean, data should be finished enough that it's, you know, comprehensible, usable, useful. We need enough context associated with the data so we know what we're looking at. This particular chart on the left side, you could see perhaps a seismograph generating from 0 time in seconds. Like, that's useful, but we don't really know, is 0 midnight or is it the second the machine was turned on? On the right-hand side, we've got a precise time. We know the date, the units, the time zone even. That allows us to know the answer to that first question, but also allows us to contextualize the data. And if we actually know the time zone and the exact time, we can now correlate that with other events that may have occurred nearby or even on the other side of the world. Whereas if we just have a time measured relative to the experiment at hand, that's a lot harder to do, and it has to be reverse engineered after the fact. So just something as simple as adding a date and timestamp to the beginning of a data stream can dramatically increase its value to the scientific community and its reusability, if you will. If you've popped around the GDR site, you've probably seen mention of 3 different tiers of data. We talk about the 3 tiers of data a little bit. They're really just a guideline to help us use a better quality of data. Not always are you going to be able to pick the maximum tier. You know, if you're uploading core photos, they're going to be images, we understand. And that's the best you can do is unstructured data in that tier 1 box on the left. But if you have a choice, if you have data in multiple formats, it's always better to choose from the higher tier. And so structured data, Excel, CSV, you know, if you can imagine a picture of a spreadsheet versus an actual spreadsheet where we can dive in and see the numbers and see the equations that are generating the numbers, that makes it a lot easier for somebody else to come export that data into a machine readable format and actually use it. Tier 3, we call that standardized structured data. And so that's basically something from the tier 2, an Excel file or a CSV that's been standardized, that conforms to an international standard or a known industry standard. And that's just even better, because instead of just a willy-nilly spreadsheet, it's a well-formed spreadsheet that people are familiar with and have used before. And that just increases the utility of that data even more. And so there are examples of those in the NGDS content models. There are also ISO international standard models out there. And these models are basically just glorified spreadsheets with predefined, well-defined field names. And so that really just providing the maximum context. So anyone using those data, they know exactly what they're talking about. There's no question about the units, the conversions, the assumptions that are going into the numbers in those data. There aren't standards for everything. In fact, there aren't even standards for most things. So many of our submissions will not conform to these standards. But I definitely encourage you to take a look at schemas.usgin.org, check out their models, and if you see something that's right in line with what you're doing, consider using that model, because the more people that use these, the more we're all speaking the same language, and we can actually form more interoperable research and analyses projects and trade data back and forth more easily. So that's what we're looking for in terms of data type and stuff. What does DOE not want? Well, we don't want any personally identifiable information. That's not to say you can't have names or emails. You can have names and emails, especially if they're public names and emails, places of work, phone numbers. You can contact people professionally. That's important. But we don't want anyone's personal email. We don't want their home phone number, and we certainly don't want any social security numbers or bank account numbers or pay stubs or anything like that submitted. And then, of course, we don't want any data that's not suitable for eventual public release. All information submitted to the GDR will eventually be made public. Some of it will be protected for a short time, and I'll talk about that a little bit during the training. But all data will eventually be made public. So please keep that in mind when you're submitting, and make sure if you're submitting, a report or something that is subject to an embargo period or a moratorium, that you remove any language that says it's proprietary or confidential, because if we receive any submissions that have that language in you, we'll just email you right back and ask you to remove it, because we'll either put it under lock and key until it's public, or we'll make it public immediately, but we'll never have stuff on there that's subject to some sort of confidentiality agreement. So if you have questions about that, feel free to ask me at the end. I can elaborate, or talk to your DOE PI. Most of those contractual agreements come out of predetermined agreements with your DOE sponsor or your data management plan that you wrote as part of your award, et cetera. The other thing we don't want is redundant information. The DOE allows you to link to existing data instead of uploading it. So if it's already stored somewhere else, especially if it's large amount of information like seismic data and it's already on one of the other networks, you can just link to it. Especially, we just want to make sure that those links are going to be there. So it's got to be a solid permanent home online somewhere for the data. A great example of this is journal articles or publications. So when we talk about creating a data submission, as I'll show in our demonstration in a few minutes, we're looking for what we call a complete data package. And that means that we will try and give people as much information about the data as we can, give them the full context. And so usually we'll upload, the raw data files, maybe some sort of summary table, some visualizations and figures, and then maybe link to a paper or a journal article that discusses the whole project, so they can get that 50,000 foot view of the work that actually happened, and then have the supporting data right there as well. And so all of those can be added to a single submission. A single data submission on the GDR allows any number of individual data resources, and resources can be files, they can be links, they can be a number of things. One of the other things we're looking for is a location for each resource. And this is a little interesting because it probably makes a ton of sense for most projects you're doing, especially if you're drilling or doing something on site and the data pertains to a particular area. You can select a point, and if it's a single borehole, for example, or if it's a regional analysis, you can actually use the map interface to draw a box. You can type in bounding coordinates if you don't want to use the map interface. Or if it's a known geothermal area, you could just, if it pertains to a commonly defined area like Desert Peak or anything from that drop down right there, you can pick from that and it'll draw the box for you. So that's just a convenience factor. We also have a few other predefined areas right under the map that I'll call your attention to. Things like surf, the world, North America, that you may want to use as quick references. And when I point out the world, that may sound a little ridiculous, but even abstract concepts or anything that's universally applicable should be assigned a location. And so in those cases, if your research is a new technology, a new drilling technology that's globally applicable, then please select world for the location for that service. And the reason is we're thinking about it from the end use, the data user, the data consumer. If they're out searching for new drilling technologies that are applicable to their area or their particular project, we want your results to show up. And so if you've selected the world, the system's smart enough to say, all the search engines out there are smart enough to say, hey, my backyard is part of the world, therefore that data is relevant. But if you don't provide any location and you say, hey, this is, it's ambiguous, it's universal, therefore no location is provided, your results will actually show up lower in the list of search results, like on a site like Google, than somewhere that specified that it was globally applicable. So every search is a geospatial search, and really all the metadata that we're asking for in the submission are about feeding the beasts. So search engines like Google, but also about our network of data partners, which I'll show in a few minutes, and really about giving our data context. We're just trying to make sure that we are providing enough information about the data to make them useful and reusable, and providing enough information to communicate effectively with the rest of the geothermal scientific community. I just want to make sure that your data is understood and interpreted correctly and in a way that's useful to others. We certainly wouldn't want to release something that had accidental, misleading information in it that could potentially be misinterpreted. That would be pretty bad. And we also don't want to, just as bad, I think, would be to release something that is accidentally misinterpreted, where units or assumptions are missed out and people think that they're, the worst case scenario I think would be if somebody was 100% confident they were using your data correctly and they absolutely weren't. So we want to make sure we provide them all the information they need to truly understand where your data came from and what they need to know in order to use it wisely. And then, as I mentioned a few slides ago, the other reason behind the metadata that we do collect in our submission form is that they're required fields for our network of data partners. The GDR has actually been built from the ground up to share information, to get it out there. It's not trying to be the one-stop shop for geothermal information. Every submission added to the GDR is automatically propagated to all of these different sites and more. And so it's really important to realize that submitting to the GDR is not just delivering a deliverable to DOE. It's really communicating with the greater scientific community. So it's no different than, submitting a paper to a journal or a publication. And that should be the guise in which you formulate a submission. So when you're choosing your title, when you're choosing your description for the submission, that's how you want to word those, as if they're being broadcast to the greater scientific community, because they are. Everything on GDR will end up on data.gov. Everything on GDR will end up on OpenAI, on OSTI, the DOE's Office of Science and Technical Information. Even Thomson Reuters data citation index will generate a mini press release for every data set that's submitted to the GDR. And we have, it's rare, but we have seen instances even of news agencies picking up on that and writing articles or stories about certain projects that have come through the GDR, which is pretty exciting. So that's the goal of the GDR and what we're doing, and I'll go through the submission process here in a moment. But honestly, at the end of the day, it's just about putting your data to work for you. You've put a lot of work into the research and projects. You're going to get it out there, and now it's time to get a return on your investment. So the more you can make it useful and put the context together to tell a story, the more you can protect your investment on that project and get a return on your investment. So that's the end of my little presentation, and I will jump into a demonstration of submission. Before I do, any questions on the presentation?
Hello, John. This is Josephat with Welltech.
Yep.
I just have a question. When you talked about the location-wise, so we're working on a project for you guys for the DOE, and it's basically U.S.-based. The scope of the technology will be used broad-wide, I guess. Once we have it it's qualified and tested. So do we put worldwide or do we keep it to the U.S. because it's DOE sponsored?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking. I would really think of our metadata collection in terms of relevance to the scientific community, so the global scientific community. We have a couple DOE specific questions in there, but many of the sites that we propagate this information out to, like worldwidescience.org and science.org and stuff, they're global organizations. And even the NGDS I was talking about earlier, the GDR is the only DOE node on that national system. So a lot of the other systems are not. And even the Department of Energy is funding stuff overseas. So they have projects, beyond the continental US. And so I would frame it as it's relevant to the data. Hypothetically, if your data was just a feasibility analysis of potential geothermal markets in the US, then I would draw a box around the US. But if it was, a new drilling technology that could be used anywhere in the world, then I would pick the world. Does that help?
Okay. Yeah, no, it does. Thank you.
Excellent. Great question. I'll show you a little bit more about that too as we get into here and actually start using the tool. Before I go into submission though, I'm just going to cover a few really basic things about the GDR site. It is on OpenAI. You'll need an OpenAI account, or you can just use your Google account when you register. You can just register with Google, but you'll need an OpenAI account before you can get there. And from the OpenAI homepage, there's just a shortcut to the GDR. OpenAI is a big site with a lot of different tools, so it's easy to kind of get lost in. When in doubt, you just need to be at gdr.openai.org, which I'll paste into chat right now. And this is the homepage you'll see. And so you see a couple of featured submissions, but if you're logged in, you'll see a big submit data button right there. You can also get to submit data under here. And there are a few other things that I'll cover during submission. But I wanted to point out that we have a link in here for data provision guidelines. We have the ability to contact GDR help at any time. You can just come into help and click this, and it will honestly just open an email that will come right to my team. So I will show you how submission works. And when you're ready to submit your data, you'll come in here, hit submit data. It's a good idea to have your submission sort of pre-organized, but it's not necessary to have it all ready to go at the same time. You'll be able to save throughout the process, et cetera. I'll demonstrate that as well. The first thing you'll see is submission name. And so for the purposes of this demonstration, I'll say I did an analysis of the Pratty 5 well in MATLAB, and tested with, we'll just say, and ground truth, I guess. And the description, so this is back to the title real quick. This is kind of along the lines of what we're looking for. We really just want to know the title, the collection of what's going to be in this submission. And, sometimes you don't really know right off the bat and you come back, and after you figure it out, then you can change the title, et cetera. That's fine. What we really don't want is we don't want to see DOE deliverable 4.2. whatever, because that is meaningless to anyone outside of your project. Most of the people at DOE aren't privy to all the different deliverable numbers, and so it's just going to confuse people. So we want to know that. If you want to put the name of your project in up here, that's great. Location, we'll say, I'm not really familiar with where Pratty 5 is. We'll say it's in New Mexico, which is probably not true. But since I was just there, I'll use New Mexico. And then the description should really just describe the contents of the submission itself. So you don't need to go into a whole project background. It doesn't need to be a full journal abstract. But you want to sort of take that abstract style approach, but instead of writing a paper here, you're describing what's actually in this collection of information. So in this particular collection of information, I'll say, it includes data from 2 days of field tests, the MATLAB program used to identify that thing we invented. I'm just making this up as I go along already, as you can't tell. And we'll say, and a summary report demonstrating the overall project and providing context. And I'll fix my typo. And then keywords. Keywords are just how you would, just like when you're choosing keywords for a journal article or a paper at a conference, it's just what people will search on. So if you can think of it like that, like filling out a conference, or if you're not familiar with that, think of it like you're going to Google and searching for your own stuff. So we've taken the liberty of putting in the very generic ones in there, geothermal and energy, but maybe this particular thing, it's definitely about Pratty 5, it's well data, maybe there's some borehole data in there. Maybe I said MATLAB was one of my examples, and we'll say that it was all about, seismic testing or something like that. And if you already have technology in there or a keyword in there, it'll flash at you. You can use the mouse to go in and delete things. You want to split things out, you can use the keyboard. You can use comma to delimit things and it'll place them out. Try to make it as user-friendly as possible. Contact name, it'll pre-populate with either your name or the last name you submitted with. But if you want to put in any name, you can. It's all Google-friendly fields, so it'll let you use auto-populate for that. Maybe I don't want to supply my phone number. That's fine. Origination date. This is the date that the data originated, not today's date, the date of submission. Let's say, it's the end of the quarter, I'm finally getting my submission in, but this data is from a test on October 10th, we'll say. Most of it. If you have multiple dates, you can put the beginning of the project, the end of the project. We don't actually have a solid guideline on that, just as long as it's in that range. People want to know, when is this data from? And the whole purpose of this is that down the road, if I ever do following on continuing work in this field, and theoretically there might be a 2018 version of this data and then a 2020 version, we want people to know that this data originated in October of 2018. And I've already entered quite a few things, and there's another little typo. And so let's say I'm going to go ahead and save. So I'll go ahead and save, just because I don't want to lose any of my progress. And you can save as many times as you want, and it will change that, and you can come back and continue adding stuff. And so if I go back to the GDR homepage now, what I'll see if I scroll down is my recent submission shows up here, my title, and it shows it's in progress. And so these are sort of the stages of submission. Once you're done, it will move into a curation period where it'll be curated by Nicole, who's on the line. And then, I think she's on the line. And then, yep. And then eventually it'll be made publicly available. If I want to edit that, I can go check it out just by clicking on it. And it will take me back to my submission page. Also under data, you can always see my submissions, which will show all of your submissions, not just your recent ones. And you can click that to go view the submission as well. So not a whole lot going on this submission page right now because we haven't filled anything out yet. But this pencil in the upper right, if I click that, it says edit, I can hop in and continue editing that submission so I can keep going. One quick note I learned recently is that some versions of IE, these show up as empty circles. So we're working on correcting that. But in the latest version of IE and all other browsers, Firefox, Chrome, etc., they show up just fine. So when in doubt, we definitely encourage you to use Chrome or Firefox, but it should work in all cases. Anyway, back to the submission. Where was I? That's a great question. If you're nervous about hitting the submit button too early, don't be. You can hit it at any time and it will just take you to the next thing you need to do. So I haven't agreed to the terms and conditions, so I'll do that. And I hit submit again. It's going to say I need to have at least an author in there. So I'll add myself as an author, and you can add as many authors as you want. Maybe for this example, I'll add Nicole Taverna, the GDR curator, and she is at the same organization I am. And let's say, hypothetically, I worked with Arlene Anderson on this as well. And I can say DOE. And if I want to edit that and say, you know what, I'm actually going to put Department of Energy. Go. Then you have your project title. Now these are the DOE fields. These get a little tricky. Project title, that's easy. My project is the Geothermal Data Repository. That's what it says on your AOP, your contract, your award, whatever. And you have to have a project lead. And my project lead is Arlene Anderson. Project number, that's the hardest field to fill out. If you've received an award from a FOA, funding opportunity, an SBIR, or a grant, you're going to have an EE number attached to that award. If you're a national lab or you're submitting to the regular lab AOP process, you can type in your AOP number. Let's say it was like an FY18 AOP, and then your WBS number, which, and I think for the GDR this year was like I actually think it was like 2.4.6.6 or something like that. Anyway, these fields, like all the fields, you'll notice they're red when you're non-conforming, and as you're typing in your number and you get to the right number of digits or the right formula, it'll turn blue, so you know you're corrected there. And if I didn't have it all in there, the whole thing turns red. So I run the GDR off an AOP, so let me put that in there, FY18 AOP 2.4.6.6, and I'm good to go there. Done a few more changes. I don't want to lose anything, so I'll go ahead and save really quick. All right. So I basically completed the whole form. The only thing I have left, and that's all the metadata we require at the submission level, I just need to add some resources. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up my files here and show you that we can actually add, said I had some MATLAB stuff in there, so we'll add some MATLAB stuff, and you can add more than one file at a time. And I had some Pratty 5 stuff in there, so we'll do that. And we'll say, you know what, this summary document, hypothetically speaking, let's say it actually exists online somewhere, and I don't want to be redundant, so I'm going to go ahead and say, you know what, it's at Stanford. I think their website's like .geo.proceedings/fake article name. And we'll say it was the Pratty 5 research paper. So I can add that link and it'll show up as another resource. And then if I want to remove the file I uploaded, I can just remove it. Okay, so I've got a bunch of resources in here. You'll notice I have these add info buttons in orange. And if I tried to submit, it would tell me that I need to add a little bit more metadata for each resource. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with location. Well, let's say hypothetically that the MATLAB scripts were globally applicable because they could be used anywhere. And once I select a location, it'll sort of remember that, and I can just go really quickly add it to as many as I want. And we'll say the well-specific location was in, oh, I don't know, we'll say Carson Lake. So I can pick Carson Lake out of there and add that. So now I've got my location information for all of my resources, and I'll go ahead and save. And now I just need to do the remaining info. So this is just a little bit more information that's required for each resource. It's not redundant with the description or dates that we've already set. It's in addition to that, and this is something that's required by the data.gov team. And it's pretty handy. We've taken the liberty of filling out as much of it for you as we can. So we've already identified, just by the nature of this file, that it's most likely code. But we always have other as an option in case the shortcuts we've taken don't make sense. So feel free to change that to whatever makes the most sense. And we'll say the description, we'll just say this is a MATLAB script to identify features. Doesn't have to be verbose. Really the point here is to help separate one resource from another and let people know what they're getting into. And let's say I wrote that this time as just to show illustration, I'll change it to a different year, and we'll say I wrote that back in December of 2016. And I will go ahead and remove this one. So pretend I don't need that one. And this one is MATLAB data file. I already recognized that. And we'll just say MATLAB data file for use with the for store script. And let's say that data was updated last week. Okay. Another example of automation, the flow data coming from the 23rd of August, 2011, pulled the data in automatically from the file name. So if that happens, you just want to check on it, make sure that's correct. Just convenience, you can always change it to whatever you want. You can change the name of the file too if you need to. And I'll just say this was flow data from the second day of the experiment. And save those changes, and then same thing here. Flow data from the first day, so the 22nd. This is also your opportunity to put in any contextual information that might be necessary to understand the data. So a really good example of that would be, let's say there was a malfunction in one of the instruments. And so we'll say a broken sensor resulted in null values from 1342 to 1407. And that would tell people, anyone using this data stream, that there was actually a broken sensor during that time period and not a lack of flow. So that might be an interesting and a very important caveat to put in there. And then the research paper I linked to, it's going to assume it's a website or an online tool or other, because it's not an actual paper at the end of the link. But if it can define its paper, it'll try to do that. That's fine. And we'll say this is the summary report describing the entire project. My typing is awesome today. And I just finished that today because I'm a slacker. Cool. So now I'm all complete. I'm going to save again just because I don't want to lose progress. And that saving feature, there's no limit on that. You know, if I want to wait, if I have a file that is still being generated and won't be ready for another couple weeks, I can come back in a couple weeks and finish the submission. That's fine. But now I should have everything I need. That's the whole submission right there. And if I go ahead and submit that, it's going to send it off to curation. So now it's in curation where Nicole can pick it up and curate it. And what she'll do as part of the curation process is we don't really evaluate the data itself. We're just looking to make sure the metadata and the context that you've provided is sufficient enough to understand what's going on in the data and what's happening, and that you've uploaded the files you said you had, and you haven't accidentally forgotten something or left something out. Just recently, we saw a submission that all the file descriptions said to please reference this file data map in this particular PDF document, but that PDF document was nowhere to be found. So it's a classic example of the type of stuff we're looking for when we're curating. And then we'll also help you out with some of the metadata as well. That's what the submission looks like when it's all finished. If there are related submissions, they'll show up down here, and those would be anything from the same organization, on the same topic, or the same DOE project number. And then we see our authors and keywords. I have the ability to toggle between just two different views. Some people like to view things in rows. Some people like the tile view, so we have both there. And then we also have the citation right here. So one of the things we're trying to do is to encourage the citation of data. Everyone's very keen to cite journal articles and publications that they're using in their research, and we want to get them to start citing data as well. And so as part of that, part of our curation process, your submission may be assigned a DOI, or Digital Object Identifier, and that is a unique identifier attributed to data objects. It's a real easy way for people to cite their data submissions and link directly to them. This is actually a proper MLA formulated citation, so you can just copy that and it'll copy right into your clipboard, and then you can paste it away. So that's the end of my submission demo. One thing I did not talk about, I guess, that I'll show really quickly is moratorium. Oh, I actually have two things left I should mention. Moratorium is if you have previously agreed with DOE that your data will not be released at the time of it's submitted. A lot of times agreements we'll submit at the time of publication, or before the end of the project, or at the end of each quarter, et cetera. Those are common agreements. If you have some other agreement with DOE and your data needs to be protected for any reason, then you check this box and put in the date that's in your contractual agreement with the Department of Energy. Defaults to a year in the future, and you're allowed to go up to 5 years in the future. So you could say theoretically, this data won't be released until December 31st, 2020. And if I check that and save it, then the submission will, once it's curated, will go into a time release vault and wait for that date, and then be automatically released to the public. So that is how that works. If I go back and look at my submissions now, I can see that that one is now in curation. So it's moved, I'll go back to the home page where you have the nice little bar. It's moved further down the progress, and it's on its way towards being publicly accessible. Okay, well, while you're thinking of questions, commonly asked questions are there any limits to the GDR? The GDR is currently limitless, which is pretty exciting. It exists on an infinitely scalable drive in the cloud, and we can take any sized file you can throw at us. Although when you start uploading more than generally about 5 or 6 gigs, you may run into issues with your internet connection. So a lot of household internet service providers, and even a lot of universities and national labs, if they notice a data stream uploading for more than a couple hours, they will actually terminate that. So you may want to check with your IT department about any firewall restrictions on uploads before trying to upload more than a 5 gig file. No limit to number of files per submission. We have some submissions that have hundreds of files in them. We have some that just have a few. And we've had submissions that have people have successfully uploaded over 100 gigs in a single file before, and so that's not a problem. If you think your submission is going to be in the 10 to 20 terabyte range, and submitting over the internet just isn't feasible, then shoot me an email and we can work that out. When you get to that level, even at the highest speed internet connection, it can actually take longer to upload than it can to throw it on a hard drive and drive it to Colorado. So we'll figure something more efficient with your time.
One question.
Yep.
We're able to link to these resources as well, and so you don't have, I mean, there's some situations where a publication will require a link to data services or, the data that went into the paper. This would be an appropriate place to link to, right?
This is, yeah, arguably the most appropriate place to link to. I'll show you an example of a submission that has a DOI too, if I can find one. A lot of times, publications will require DOI.
A DOI, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, oops, I went to the wrong thing. Not all submissions will get a DOI, but if you need one and you don't have one for some reason, just shoot us an email and we'll be able to help you out with that. So here's a formulated submission that has been fully curated, but did end up being subject to one of those time release conditions. So you can see right here, all resources will be available on June 30th, 2019. So they're not available for download yet, but I can just take the link from the top up here, and that's a great link to have it to. We also have the DOI here, and if you're familiar with DOIs, and honestly, we should probably just put the link in here for you. We'll make sure we do that soon. But if you're familiar with DOIs, there's some sort of URL like dxdoi.org / and then the number, and it'll take you right to that exact same submission. So the DOI actually links right to this page as well. So when you're on your submission landing page, just grab the URL for that, and that's a permanent home for your submission. That will work for all publication requirements. The other thing I want to note since I'm here is there is an advantage. The reason we do this, even though this data isn't available till July 30th, we make the metadata available immediately. And the advantage to doing that is, there's an intrinsic value in being able to say, these data exist, you just don't have access to them yet. And there are a couple different values to that. One is, you could always contact the primary contact and ask for an advanced copy of it if you're interested, and try and coordinate with them. And a lot of times that's okay. The other advantage is if you were, thinking that this was some sort of gap that you were going to fill with your project, it's important to know that, hey, maybe somebody's already done this work, it's just not available to the public yet, and that's why it's not out there. And then, therefore, instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, maybe you team up with them and try and move the needle a little further down the road, to mix metaphors there. Good question. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, if any questions pop up as you're doing your projects, if you need help organizing your data or have questions about submitting your data, please don't hesitate to just come to the GDR, pop in, contact GDR help. That sends an email right to me, or you can email me directly and my team will get back to you and be glad to help you out. Thank you all for your time today. Hopefully this was informative and you got a good idea of what we're looking for and how to craft a quality data submission that will really help you get a return on your investment for the time it takes to get your data out there. So thanks, I appreciate it, and I hope you have a great day.